In 2017, Ben Deuling entered a graduate program with the goal of earning a Ph.D. in microbiology. 3 years later, he left the program to start a mushroom farm. Today, his company, SporeAttic in Bozeman, produces 1,000 pounds of mushrooms per week for some of the finest restaurants in southwestern Montana. This is a story of self-discovery, the courage to change directions, and the hard work of growing a business from ground up.
Everything I do, I'm building with my hands, and I can see it right in front of me.
Yeah.
You can see the feedback, the mistakes, the successes.
You have a product.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that was
cool.
big for me, I think. And then to be able to show up and work with chefs and hand them a product and say, here's the thing, you can use the thing, and it's undeniable. You know, it's not,
Yeah.
there's nothing mysterious about it. It's not, you know, does this give me some health benefit or does this cause some effect? No, you're going to cook with it and you're going to be able to make this dish, and it's real.
So when did you start here, Ben, in MSU?
I started at MSU in 2017, so I came out here to interview for the molecular biosciences PhD program, the fellowship. And so the way that worked is coming out of undergrad, my passion and my background was all in human nutrition and then athletic performance, and I started getting really excited about molecular sciences. I had done a few, kind of undergrad research projects, just scratched the surface of it, enough to pique my interest. And I knew I was passionate about science at a molecular level, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And so then the search for grad school was really terrifying because I was kind of on my own trying to figure out how to apply for grad school and what that looked like. And from what I could tell, PhDs, for the most part, came in knowing what they were going to study. And I was terrified to lock myself into something for the next 5 to 7 years. And I knew myself, I was like, it's going to be 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be one of the guys that gets out in 5. And so I found this program, and it was one of very few in the country. That was basically the way I understood it was, we want people who are passionate, that are excited about molecular sciences, but don't necessarily know where they want to focus it yet.
Yeah.
And when I saw it, I mean, my heart was racing, my jaw dropped. It was like, there it is. I only applied to MSU. I only applied to one grad school. I was like, no plan B, it distracts from plan A kind of a situation. It was really dramatic. And I was a 4.0 student. I was top of my class, graduated with like the excellence in the biology department, all of that. I probably should have applied to many schools, but I only saw one that I wanted to go to.
Huh.
And I looked at what felt like all of them,
And where were you from?
Michigan. So
Okay.
I grew up in West Michigan, Grand Rapids area, and then went to school in the Upper Peninsula at Lake Superior State University. Little tiny school, 2,200 students, no grad programs. It was only undergrad. So there wasn't a lot of research happening. And so that's why, the little bit of exposure I did have was exciting, but I didn't have, the full immersion into it. And so when I came out here, I was really transparent in my application and in my interviews. I was like, I am not a walking encyclopedia. Like I tend to think a lot of academic people are. I don't feel intelligent necessarily. I don't feel like I have all of the information that I can just draw on. What I have is a tremendous amount. Well, that wasn't my perspective. My perspective seems like you guys know everything.
I can understand.
And it was like, what I have is an insane work ethic and a passion that is unparalleled. I feel like I pretty much said that in my interviews with Seth, which was interesting.
Yeah.
And so I ended up getting accepted into the program, and when I came out here in 2017, I started in a rotation in plant science. Then I moved to neuroscience. So in plant science, we were doing like CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing in wheat and barley to make them drought resistant. In neuroscience, we were driving the probes into monkey brains to map the brain and all of that.
You were all over the place.
And then I went to microbiology, where I met Doug and Seth, and ultimately landed there. And the reason I landed there was, it was interesting. You remember Tots? I don't know if Tots is still around. He took a mentorship role in my life, and he explained to me, don't pick the lab based on the project. Pick the lab based on your relationship with the PI. Like, there will be funding, there will be projects, there will be opportunities. You can do a PhD in plant science, and that can still take you to where you want to go, even if you don't end up doing plant science. Yeah. But what you can't escape is a bad relationship with your advisor. Yeah, and so when I met Seth and Doug, I was like, these guys get it. These guys are real human beings. They're going to understand it when something comes up in my life, whether that's a family member passing or I have a change in heart or whatever comes up. I had this feeling that these guys are going to get it, and they're going to support that, and they're going to say go. They're going to say drop your research and go. And then ultimately, 3 years in, that did happen when I presented them with my business plan for the mushroom farm, and they were just grinning ear to ear. They were like, this is the coolest thing ever. You have to do this. It was exactly what I predicted but hoped wouldn't happen. It was kind of a, hopefully I see the PhD through. It wasn't like I went in expecting not to. But I definitely had that fear of committing. Yeah. And I think a big part of why I joined those labs was because I had a hunch that if something ever came up, I would be able to, get out of there safely.
So some amount of introspection or awakening or something must have happened between the time you started the program and the time you decided to grow mushrooms. So, what changed?
I started in.
What did you see?
Yeah, so I'm pretty transparent about this. I talked to a lot of people about it. When I joined in 2017, almost immediately, like the day I got to Bozeman, or maybe like 2 or 3 days later, I became incredibly depressed. I'd never felt depression like this before. And it never really went away. It just stayed. And it was kind of this quarter life crisis, I guess, if you want to call it that. It was just this, oh no, what have I done? I don't belong here. I'm not one of them. And everyone I would talk to would say, well, that's imposter syndrome. And so I bought into that idea for a couple years until I eventually realized, like, no, I really don't belong in this academic environment. I don't thrive here. My brain isn't working well. You guys saw the operation. You saw what my brain could do, and you saw that I wasn't doing that in the lab. And I knew I had this fire in me in my undergrad, in my athletic career, and nutrition. In everything I've done, I've excelled. That sounds cocky, but it's the truth. If I can sink into something, I've always gotten, I've risen to the best that I could be. Yeah. And in grad school, I just felt like I couldn't access that. I constantly felt inferior, constantly felt like I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't remember the material. I was doing okay as far as, if you looked at my transcript, you looked at my grades, they were fine. If you looked at my research in progress presentations, those went fine. Nothing.
So you had a project that you were working on.
I bounced project to project to project. I think I did 4 different projects in the year and 3 quarters that I was working in these labs. And that was a big part of it, was I just don't feel it in this. This isn't clicking for me. I'm not able to unlock that passion and that drive and that calling and that purpose. That seems interesting. Let me go try that. And then and Seth and Doug would be like, yeah, go for it. Do it. And I'd jump over and try something in microfluidics with Connie Chang's lab. And then, and that was really cool. And then it was, hey, I see something going on in the left court lab with the mice models with the vagus nerve. Let me jump on that and try that. And I just kept bouncing project to project. And I'd put in a good effort. It wasn't that I wasn't just scratching the surface. I mean, I was in the lab super late, sometimes till the sun was rising, and trying my best, but just really not feeling it. I felt like, and I thought, I'm finally out of college. I'm in the real world. This is just what everyone feels, was kind of my thought. It just sucks to be an adult, was what I kind of thought. The fun part of life is over. The 25 and under is when you have freedom and, have that ability to explore and go be a hippie or whatever you want to do, and this is what it's going to be like. And I became very depressed. I just didn't feel like I clicked. I wasn't real good to my health in that time. I wasn't great in my relationship with my girlfriend at the time. Just everything in life kind of started crumbling, and I ultimately I was just really, really depressed. And then something really cool happened it was when I went home for Christmas. It would have been, I think, December 2018, so going into New Year's 2019. I was at a family friend's Christmas party, and he throws this big party for his plumbing company every year. It's a big thing. And I went to that, and I commented on he had this cool U-shaped glass desk, and I was just kind of admiring it. And he saw something in me, and he's known me since I was born, so he could read me like a book, and I was like, this is great. I feel like if I had something like this, like maybe I'd be able to, work better. Maybe I'd be able to focus better and read my papers, and, if I could have the monitor. And he was just like, you're not thinking big enough. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, no, I just mean because I can't focus. And he wouldn't let me finish. He's like, you're not thinking big enough. And I did not know what he meant at that moment. It was probably 9 o'clock at night, and he then basically abandoned his Christmas party to sit at his bar with me and basically drill into me until about 4 in the morning, until it was literally just me and him sitting there. And then for another couple hours after that. And it was this whole talk of, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? He's like, I've never been that big of a fan of academia. Both of his daughters went that route. And he's like, I've known you since you were born. I know the passion you have. What is it that you want out of this PhD? What does it look like to win in this? And I couldn't really give him anything. Yeah. I just kept saying the only thing I could come back to was that I wanted to be a teacher. I've always wanted to be a teacher. And so in my mind, I thought, I have to go be a professor. I have to stand in front of lecture halls, and I can be that really animated, really passionate professor. I wanted to be the professor like the handful that I had that really inspired me, that really made a difference. And I wanted students like me. You know what I mean? I wanted that kid that sat in the front row and asked all the questions and came to office hours and took everything very serious and looked for ways to connect the dots. And we all know that's not the majority of students in a lecture hall, but that was the facade I was telling myself was, I want to be a teacher. This is the path to doing that. I need to get a PhD so that I can be a professor in front of a class. Mm-hmm. At some point in time I think in the process, I started to realize that's not how this works. One, you don't need a PhD to be a teacher in front of a classroom. If that's really what you want, you don't need to get the PhD. So what am I even doing here? I started kind of looking into the financials behind, just being a teacher, just being a, what would you call it, a teaching professor, I guess. Yeah. Doesn't seem like it really would have allowed for a great financial stability later in life. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh no, like the ability to have security is kind of tied to your ability to succeed in research. And that is the area that I just do not feel called to. I do not feel passionate about. I like the big picture idea. I love the abstract, I love this is the grandiose thing that we're going to tackle. But then once you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in some more, and then you're like, this is actually what my day-to-day life is going to look like, I lost all passion for it. That's why I think I liked a lot of the presentations. Right. You could kill 10 of 20 minutes talking about the big picture, and I could get a crowd really amped up and excited, having drinks at the bar, talking to people about your research. I could sink into that. Yeah. But then when it got to my day-to-day work and the computing and the statistics and the data, it didn't mean anything to me. Yeah.
Do you think it's like the way the payoff structure works? Like the day-to-day doesn't give you these deliverables that say, I've accomplished this, whereas like standing in front of the classroom, giving a presentation, it's immediate feedback. Like you have a payoff, you have a deliverable, it's your presentation. Mm-hmm. I think in research it's not really, and
sometimes with research too, and I think especially some of the projects that I know you worked on, we didn't know whether there would be a payoff, right? Like,
I mean, like that was all my projects were just totally experimental.
True to what you said, I mean, I'm sure Doug would say the same thing. We saw a very hardworking, enthusiastic person that was, you know, oh, that's cool, oh, that's cool, oh, that's... So the projects that I think we may have offered were more open-ended because we thought, here's a person that's going to, you know, if the hypothesis is supported, Ben's going to figure that out.
Yeah.
You know, that's the confidence that you exude. And, yeah, but
Thank you.
You're also, I think, hitting on a very important topic for, you know, folks that are considering grad school, and they miss the step of evaluating, do I need a PhD to do what I want to do?
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of folks that have their PhD that wish they would have spent a little bit more time asking that question.
Yeah. I always say it's the next logical step.
Right.
Yeah. Like, well, what are you going to do after you finish college? The next logical step, more college, grad school.
Yeah, it's the next level of high school.
Yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to do at the end of college, so let me buy myself another 3, 5, 7 years to really have to make that decision.
Yeah. Well, that's what you knew, right? I mean, I think it's the same, kind of the same for me. When I graduated college, I knew that I was a good student, and I knew how to be a student, but that's about all I knew how to do.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And so I just looked for the continuation after that. It's been fine. It's worked out well with some drawbacks, but that was my way of continuing to test the waters until it kind of all fell into place.
And so then to come back to your question about, you know, whether I think it's the payoff or, you know, the instant gratification, I truly think it's just my personality type.
Yeah.
Because I could look around that grad office and see 8, 12 other people in there locked in. You know, they'd have their 3 monitors and their reclining chair, and they'd be designing proteins, and you couldn't interrupt them if you had to. And like, you're right where you belong. You get this. It works for the way you think. You care about it. You're passionate about it. You like the intricacies and the big picture. This is where you belong. I couldn't get myself to lock into that at all. Where I did thrive was teaching, which brings me back to that story of the family friend who drilled into me that night. As I kept coming back to this idea that the only thing I knew I wanted to be was a teacher, he runs a plumbing company, and he grabs this glass of water and swirls it around, and he's like, I'm a plumber. I teach people every day how they get their clean water. I teach my employees how to bend pipe. I teach people how to make shit run uphill. Sorry, we're not supposed to swear. He's like, I teach people every day, and I love it. And I never went to school, and I've never stood in front of a lecture hall. Yeah. You don't have to be a teacher to teach. And that was like the most profound moment in all of this. It was this, how haven't I thought of that? You know, you can teach anything. You can teach in athletics. You know, you can be in any level of employment and be a teacher.
Yeah.
I don't have to be in academia and rise to the ranks of being a PhD professor and standing in front of a lecture hall to be a teacher. And so I went home that night, morning, 5 a.m. or so, and before I fell asleep, I wrote every single thing down that I could remember. It was one of those moments where you know something's happening. It was like, this feels very important. Before I fall asleep, I wrote every single thing down from that conversation until I fell asleep. And then when I came back that January, so that seed was planted. That idea was planted, but I didn't know how it was going to materialize. And I came back and I was teaching, as I love to do, general microbiology lab. And it was my 3rd semester teaching that lab. And I loved it. I loved teaching. I was that TA that, you know, everyone wanted as their TA. I'd put my research on the back burner to go focus on being a TA for a gen bio lab because I cared so much about it. I'd put 2 hours into each person's paper with all the most detailed feedback ever. I loved it. I loved the feedback. I loved being able to inspire these students. I'm going off on a tangent here, but that I was teaching that general micro lab, and I would always have my students say something interesting about themselves so that I could remember them. And one of the students goes, fun fact about me, when I lived in Mississippi, I owned and operated a gourmet mushroom farm. and I'm in Bozeman on a GI Bill, basically looking for my next business partner to start my next venture. And I went, dude, we should talk. And he's like, yeah, we should. And that was kind of the start of it.
So you were not growing mushrooms before that?
No, I never cared about mushrooms. Mushrooms were never a part of my life at all.
This was out of the blue?
Out of the blue,
okay.
Completely. It turned out that to grow mushrooms, so he needed his scientist and his personality. He wanted to be the builder, the quiet guy, and the business behind it. And it was like, perfect, that's what I want to do. I want to be the scientist, and I want to be the spokesperson for the company. And we schemed this together for a while. We would meet at Bunkhouse Brewery right off campus. Sorry if we're not supposed to use names. We would meet at the brewery adjacent to campus, and about every Tuesday. And we kind of did it in secrecy for a while. I didn't know if there was a weird conflict of interest with him being my student. But once he was not my student anymore, then we formed the LLC. And almost immediately, he withdrew from the picture. He had some health complications. It tied in a lot to what we were studying with the GI distress, all the with IBD and all of that. That was a big part of his motive to getting into mushrooms, was that mushrooms helped his IBD, which really, it all kind of came full circle. It was like, dude, this is what I'm studying. I know it at the big level. I don't know it as well as I could at the microscopic level, but I'll make it PG. The way he would say it was pretty vulgar, but when he ate tons and tons of gourmet mushrooms, it made everything work a lot better. It made everything flow a lot better.
A lot of fiber.
Yeah.
And that was his simple motivation for why he loved mushrooms and loved that business. And so once he kind of got me going in this, he planted the seed, pushed the wheel over the hill, whatever the expression would be, then I was hooked. Then I fell in love with it very fast. I converted my laundry room into a fully automated mushroom lab. And I had, at that point, never built anything with my hands. I couldn't do much more than change my own oil. That was about the extent of what I could build or do with my hands. And I managed to build this fruiting chamber, this humidification tank. I built a flow hood in like the most dingy, disgusting basement apartment. Mike Dills and I lived together there for a while.
I've heard rumors.
Yeah, the Taj. It's a legendary, disgusting basement apartment that a lot of the microbiology students go through. And so very fitting that I would
immerse themselves in microbiology.
Yes, a lot of experiments. Yeah, a lot of microbiology experiments have taken place in the house. So I got to contribute to that legacy by building a mushroom lab in the laundry room. And it was not the right word, addictive. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was enamored with it. I was enamored with the process, the DIY nature of it, the craftiness of it, the constantly talking to people all over the internet in forums and watching YouTube videos and learning all this stuff and troubleshooting and doing really simple and basic science without any of the bureaucracy. No one's approving this. No, I don't have to ask for permission to do anything. I don't need to. I'm growing the mushrooms, and if they work, we'll eat them. And it was so simple, and it was like there's so many experiments happening to get from point A to Z and to have a finished product and have it work. And it took me probably 4 months to get to where I was growing good mushrooms. And I mean, I had a flow hood in my laundry room that we built out of a HEPA filter and a furnace fan and a box and blew it over a cheap little folding table. And I was sitting there pouring agar plates and having them work, and not be contaminated, and doing transfers and cutting up agar plates and having a Bunsen burner or a little alcohol flame.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, this is the science. This is at the scale I like science. To go beyond it, to go to what is necessary for higher academia, that's where I lost it. And so this brought me back to a level that I really loved, the experimentation at that scale, and then to be able to grow food and just be doing something so neat and interesting, and nobody else knows anything about this, so everybody wants to talk to me about it. And I love talking, so I'm just like, let me tell you everything, let me tell you the whole story. And so it just worked really well.
I mean, that's kind of interesting, because the self-directed research component of what you just described is it's not too different than what a lot of students do at the bench in a more formalized setting.
Yeah.
But the difference is, I mean, you can speak to the difference here, but it sounds to me like it was ownership, and it was like
control.
It was yours, and you were creating something from the ground up.
An application, right? Like
right.
you applied your knowledge for that, system, and then you got something really tangible.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember there was one time in the lab I needed a particular compound, and it was very specific. It was like, hey, I think for this microfluidics thing, I need a GFP attached to whatever. It was pretty specific, but I found it. It was like, here it is. It's going to cost $175 for a little vial of it, and it took me about 4 months to get it.
Yeah. And
it was just like, that's maddening to me. I can't do that. I need to have more control than that. And to me it was just silly, because it was like, what? I know we have the funding for it. I know that this is necessary. I've gotten everyone's thumbs up, but now there's just like paperwork and processes, and then it would bounce back. Why did it just was chaos to get this one compound. And then in this situation, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I put a vacuum filter on that, if we'd stop growing bacteria in there. And then I pull up Amazon and like buy or no, I'd go into the garage upstairs and start rifling through piles of junk and find a vacuum filter or find the fan I needed. And I'd literally just MacGyver all this together. And it was like, have an idea, have a functioning machine in 2 hours. And I think that meant a lot to me. I think that mattered a lot for my personality. To be able to have that control and to be able to have that tangible outcome.
So maybe before everybody thinks that you're delivering mushrooms grown in the basement, why don't you talk a little bit about transitioning to your facility?
Sure, yeah. So that kind of seed was planted in January of 2019. I think it was by August that I was like growing mushrooms in the laundry room, like they were starting to work. And I ran that from August through November or December is when I shut it down for when I was going to go home for Christmas. I was like, that has served me. I failed a lot on the small scale. That was good. I learned what I needed to learn. I took really good notes. I got incubation times and fruiting times and CO2 to oxygen, and I did my experimenting, and I got the data I needed to inform the expansion. Probably spent $2,500 in total on that 4-month experiment, which probably saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars in failures later because I didn't need to make those mistakes later. So in the meantime, June, July, August, that buddy of mine, that student of mine that I was going to go into business with, we were all over Bozeman. I mean, we had ads on Craigslist. I'm kind of blown away that nobody in microbiology ever caught on to us doing this. We weren't sneaky enough about it, but we were looking at people's sheds and garage spaces and office spaces and attics and basements and shop units all over and trying to find, where can we do this? Where can we commercialize this?
I see. Yeah.
And everything was prohibitive for one reason or another. It wasn't zoned right, or it was way too expensive, or they wanted, too big of a commitment, or it was too far away, or it was too broken down and gross, and we didn't want to put the legwork in. It was just kind of the same boat I'm in now, looking for land that can work, but at a more mature level. But at that point, an undergrad and a grad student trying to find a place to grow mushrooms all over town, and we probably struck out 20, 30 times. And we actually had committed to a space between Bozeman and Belgrade where this guy had set up marijuana grow ops before it was legal. I think he liked to fly under the radar and set these things up in unzoned areas. And we were like, cool, floor drains, power, light, all the things we need. And so I talked him down from a year commitment to a 6-month commitment if we paid up front, and I got him to drop the price a little bit. And so we sunk $4,000 plus our deposits were maybe another $1,000. We had like $5,000 into this, which for us at that moment was pretty much everything we had. And then I started applying for farmers markets and trying to get let's start planting the seeds for this summer. We think we'll be growing by this date. We think we'll have a viable product and be able to start selling by this day. What kind of licenses do we need and what kind of approvals? And oh my gosh, I started going down all these rabbit holes of you need to talk to the health department, you need to talk to these. It was like, oh no. And so I started chasing all this stuff down, and it turned out that this guy's property wasn't entirely legal. I think he had a septic system that had never been registered or something like that. It was like pending approval from 2012 or something like that. And so because of that one little caveat, we were never going to be able to get our license. We were never going to be able to get the approval to grow food in that space and sell it for human consumption. And I panicked. And I was actually in the lab. I think I was probably in Doug's lab. And I was outside Cooley, pacing back and forth on the phone, talking to Nathan. Sorry, that was his name. I was going to try to avoid saying it, but I've said it now. Outside talking to him, and he was a veteran. He was honorably discharged for his GI issues that was caused by Giardia while he was deployed. And so he, as he would put it, could show his dark side really well, whereas I couldn't. You know, I'm very gentle, I'm very friendly, and he could get mean. And so I'm like, dude, we're screwed. We just sunk all our money into this. The clock's ticking. We only got 6 months to like do all this. And he was like, do you want to make the call or do you want me to? And I was like, I want you to make the call because you can show your dark side. Hung up the phone. About 3 minutes later, he calls back and he's like, the contract's being shredded, check's in the mail. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I was pacing outside Cooley, panicking. Like, I wonder if anyone sees me right now and wonders what I'm doing. Because I kept all of this completely secret from everyone on campus. I didn't let anyone know I was even growing mushrooms because, I don't know, I didn't want it to conflict with what we were doing. I didn't want anyone to get upset. But anyway, so then it was this pause. And that was like June, July, August, somewhere in there. It was like, hang on. Let's figure out what we're doing before we dump all our money in next time. We got really lucky that we got away safe and we got our money back. At that point, I don't think I had grown mushrooms yet. So this, was like July. And I hadn't actually seen him grow mushrooms or even seen pictures of his mushrooms or anything. It was all, I was like, I don't actually know what I'm doing. Let's take that money that we just sank and let's build out like a grow op in my basement. And I need to actually do this. I can only take your word so much. And so that's what led to building out the basement grow op. And then in the meantime, in a very serendipitous way, I ended up meeting a connection to Three Hearts Farm, which is where the farm is located. I met some flower farmers who had set up their flower farm on the property of Three Hearts. I met them at a farmer's market, and I say very serendipitously because I don't particularly care about flowers. I don't think flowers just do nothing for me. It's so bizarre that I walked up to a flower farming booth and talked to these people. Very out of character for me, but I did. And one thing led to another, and they told me where they were set up, and I'm thinking, hey, do they got more space out there? You guys are young business owners getting started out there, and they're like, yeah, there's actually quite a bit of space. You should reach out to the owners and pitch them an idea and see what they have to say. So I went back and crafted this 1-paragraph email to them. It took me hours to write this one email, basically saying like, hey, I've got this crazy idea for a mushroom farm that I want to start. I'd love to sit down and chat with you about potentially building it out on your farm. Sent that off, and they got back right away. And they were like, yeah, swing by Sunday. Let's talk about it. Very special moment in time for me. I can't believe that it worked the way it did. Me and my buddy Nathan, we went out there, and like I said, we had swung and missed dozens, 20, 30 times all over Bozeman for various reasons. And when we met the farmers at Three Hearts, you could feel it in your stomach. We've talked about it since then plenty of times. Like, there was a tangible feeling in our stomachs that was like, this is it. This feels right. We were all sitting cross-legged in a field. The sky was blue. The birds were chirping. There's all these little kids running around. There's, people carrying sacks of produce. And it was just this, like, where are we? Like, this is so special. And there was a moment where we were sitting, just the four of us, and me and Nathan were across from each other. And we locked eyes, and we both, like, patted our stomachs. Because it was just like, do you feel that? Like, do you feel how right this feels? Maybe that was the microbiome talking. I don't know what it was. Yeah, it was very.
Gut brain axis.
It was the gut brain axis. Yeah, it was profound. I mean, you couldn't ignore it. And so initially it was going to be, let's put a prefabricated shed on the property. Or initially it was, let's take over one of your greenhouses. Then it was, let's put a prefabricated shed on your property. And then Nathan was out of the picture by this point, July, August, somewhere in there. And I'm thinking, now I lost my builder. He was a carpenter. He knew construction. And so now I don't know how to build anything. I lost the money, I lost the business experience, I lost the mushroom farming experience. I actually was completely ready to throw in the towel until another friend of mine on a late night walk spoke into my life at a really important time too. He's actually the guy I live with right now. He was like, dude, this is perfect because now you can control it. It's funny because just today he was talking to me about how much I need control, and it's come up in this conversation a couple times. That was cool foreshadowing right before I left for this. So he told me, like, Nathan, moving on and doing something different, this doesn't need to be the end of this. This means you get to now control it. He got you going, and now it's yours. You can do it the way you want. And that was really valuable that he told me that, because I probably was about ready. I was about ready to back out and just keep my head down and keep grinding in grad school. And who knows how that would have played out. But I decided to push forward, and so at that point I was going to set a prefabricated shed on their farm and operate in that. It was like an 18 by 24 foot shed that I was going to get from Strike Farm, and in hindsight that never would have worked very well at all, but I didn't know. And while I'm trying to get this all figured out, and I'm totally bluffing that I've got it secured, whereas the person who actually owns the shed is like, no, I want $18,000 for it. I'm thinking, you're crazy. Absolutely not. I offered her $4.5. It had been built out as a walk-in cooler, so it had this insulated room with airflow. It had a lobby kind of area, and then it had the attic. So I was like, lab, incubation, grow room, all in one. I can work with that. I can MacGyver what I need to make it work. And Josh, the owner of Three Hearts Farm, calls me one morning. It's another very serendipitous moment, because I would always sleep until 10, 11 o'clock. And for some reason, I sat up in my bed at, 7 a.m. or something. And my phone was lighting up on the other side of the room. It wasn't vibrating or anything. It was just lighting up. And I woke up and I answered it, and it was Josh. And he's like, hey, Ben, are you on campus? And I'm like, I was just about to walk out the door. I'm actually on my way up right now. What's going on? He's like, can you meet me at the coffee shop? I have an idea. And it was another one of those, like, I was like, something's happening. Yep, I'll meet you there in 15 minutes. Throw my clothes on, running up the Garfield Street. The imagery I have in my head of that moment, just like still getting dressed, running down the street. Something great's about to happen. And he sat me down and was like, I know you're really attached to this shed idea. And in my head, I'm like, no, I don't even know if I can get it. But I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, for the amount of money you're going to spend on that shed and, the crane and the semi and the moving it, the insurance policy, you're going to need to excavate some form of foundation, running the power, running the water. For what you're going to do to that, we can just build you something way better, something to your design that we'll be happy to keep on our property when you leave. Yeah. Something that we can make multi-purpose and then use it towards our farm later, because we might not want that shed. You might need to pay again to get it out of here. Yeah. And man, talk about waterworks. Like, I left that coffee shop and I was like, no way. Like, things are just happening. Things are just falling in line. And so then we started meeting every couple weeks and designing that facility, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more expensive and more expensive. And what was going to be just me running my own business turned into, now we're designing a very small manufacturing operation that can have employees and is going to be very legitimate. It's going to be built very soundly, and I got to design it to my spec based on what I believed I knew off of that basement experiment phase. I believed, okay, it takes this long to incubate, so that means for this many pounds per block, I need, I could do the math and go, I need the incubation room to be able to sit this many blocks. I need it to be this big. Yeah. So let's move that wall. Let's make the lab a little bit smaller. It doesn't, let's move the grow room this big. And I just kept tinkering with it until I was like, I think that's it. I think that's going to be able to grow 500 to 600 pounds of mushrooms per week. And turned out I was spot on. It grows 500 to 600 pounds of mushrooms per week when it's totally maxed out. Mm. Yeah. And then 2 years later, once it was maxed out, we still had 2 years left on our lease. So that's when we added those shipping containers into it and did this quasi kind of expansion onto the building to expand our bottlenecks, the incubation room and the grow room. And so now we can do 1,000 pounds a week.
Yeah. You keep talking about serendipity and things.
Mm-hmm.
But I took a picture of that.
Yeah.
So
the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That really seems important in your life.
It is.
Yeah.
Where do you get the energy for that, to be honest? We've talked about this before, and some people recognize that hard work is necessary for success.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they just can't execute it for a variety of different reasons. It could just be serendipity, or it could be that they just don't physically feel like they can devote that much effort to it. And that's like a physiology.
And so
that can be all the difference.
There's a lot of different ways we could go with this conversation. It's something I'm very passionate about because, like I said, when I was in grad school, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't that I couldn't figure out how to run these experiments or do the research. It just, I did not want to wake up in the morning and go do this. Yeah. Now, I'm waking up before my alarm, and I can't wait to get to that farm and see what new things I can get into today. It's very much about finding, your calling. It sounds cliche, but it's finding that. And Seth literally told me this in that meeting. If we have time, we should talk about the 8-day stretch leading up to me eventually presenting my business plan to Seth and Doug. Because it's a really dramatic little chunk of time where I realized this is my calling and nothing is going to stop me from doing this. And I found what I could only say was superhuman strength and energy and passion. Completely sober, no other than coffee. It was no sleep for days and days on end, just performing at the highest caliber I possibly could. And when I finally did present my business plan and financial projections and the design of the facility and all of this stuff to Seth and Doug, what I imagined would be this terrifying, daunting conversation of hey, I've been working on something. It was, I walked in the room and Seth spins around in his chair holding my business plan and he's like, dude, what is this? This is incredible. You've been working. And it was this passionate conversation that feels like it went on for hours where, we talked about exactly this, about finding that thing that calls you. I remember Seth going into a story about, I think when you were in grad school and you were working with these mouse models, these mouse cancer models, and all of the different applications that these were going to have for human disease and how exciting it was for you. And you could see it while you were talking, you were glowing. You were talking about this chase for this discovery and what that meant to you. And you were going and going and you were talking faster and faster and faster. And you stopped and you looked at me and you're like, and so if this isn't doing that for you, then you need to get out of here and you need to go chase this thing that's going to do that for you. And it was such a profound moment. It was such a memorable moment in my mind. Where someone just got it. Someone saw that I'm not finding that thing here that is giving me limitless energy, that is giving me the ability to articulate well and be sharp and be passionate and be sober. I couldn't wait to get out of the lab and go home and drink or whatever. I just wanted to numb out. I was not fulfilled and happy. Yeah. And so I tell people all the time, if what you're doing in your life is making it to where you live for the weekend, or you can't wait for 5 o'clock so you can go home and drink and smoke and all this stuff to tap out, because you need to escape your reality, you need to pay attention to that. Yeah. That's a huge indicator that you are not where you need to be in life.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point. I mean, I think a lot of people will look at somebody like you who's clearly firing on all cylinders and say, well, he probably just does that for every endeavor that he's had in life. And
I did.
Oh, you did?
When I really cared about what I was doing.
Yeah.
And that's what I was saying. I couldn't tap into it in grad school. I'm like, where's that? Maybe this is just what being an adult is. Maybe you just like get sad and lazy and you just like you let your health go to hell and you fall apart. No, it was because I wasn't doing the right thing for I was not in my calling. I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think it's important to recognize that. Like, if you're not feeling it, it may not be intrinsic to you. It just simply may be that you haven't found what you're passionate about yet.
Right.
There's just a lot of people that do force it, and they settle, right? To be quite honest.
Most people probably.
Yeah.
We talked about that in that meeting.
Yeah. Entrepreneurs, like, there's that risk, there's that leap, and man, it takes a lot of strength and confidence, right? So but
I mean, we talked about it in that meeting. I can't remember if you gave names, but I felt like I knew who you were talking about, or you were like, there are these people, they don't belong here either, and they're gonna stick it out, and they're gonna get their PhD, and they're gonna be miserable the whole time, and
I might switch careers later.
Yeah, but it's that. Oh, I just heard the term the other day. What is it? Something cost. Like once you're already so far into something, you're like, well, I better see it through. Sunk cost. Yes, thank you. Sunk cost of a PhD. It's like, well, I've already put 3 years in. I'll put another 3-4 years in, and it'd be a shame to walk away now. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm really grateful that I had the fortitude to say, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Right. I'm not going to, because it'd be like now, right now would be about when I'd be getting my PhD. And I'm way more proud of what I ended up doing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
With the alternative that I went with.
I mean, you must have been scared, though, right?
It was the scariest thing I can imagine. That moment, sitting, there's a chair between Seth and Doug's office. I don't know if you're still in that same place, but there was a spot. There was one chair sitting there, and so it was, Monday morning after I had given Doug my business plan on Friday. I went home. I slept all weekend. I was a wreck. I was really distressed after this 8-day push where I put the whole business together. And then I came in that morning to have this meeting with Seth and Doug, and I'm sitting in this chair between their offices, and my entire body is trembling. My legs I'm a pretty fidgety guy as it is, but my legs were going, my arms were going, I'm picking my fingers, I'm shaking my head. Everything about me was trembling for minutes and minutes and minutes. And I remember someone Marta walked by, and she's like, Ben, are you okay? And I stopped, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm good. And she went into the left court lab, and I went right back to just panicking, because it was like, what are you doing? It was such a transitional moment in life. It was a literal fork in the road. Mm-hmm. You're going to walk in that room and drop out of a PhD, a fully funded PhD, to go start a mushroom farm? Like every bit of doubt you can imagine is going through my head in that moment. And I don't know. I'm really, really proud of myself for still doing it.
You should maybe, do mention like the business plan side of things, because I think a lot of people have good ideas and are excited about trying something new, but they just simply say, I wouldn't even know where to start. Like, I don't know how to run a business. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it will take, and if I would be good at that side of things. And you probably didn't know either.
I didn't know at all.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what a business plan was. I hadn't even heard of that. So, remember when I was talking about applying to the farmers markets, and they're like, okay, will you send us this license and this license? And I was like, oh, where do I get those? Okay, well, take down these numbers. Now you have these 3 numbers. Mm-hmm. And then I talked to those 3 numbers, and then they each give me 3 more numbers. And it became this whole web of all these different agencies, and ultimately a lot of people I didn't really need to talk to, but I didn't know that at the time. It was just like, oh, there's all this stuff I don't know. Yeah. And at that point, I was so ready. We sunk $5,000 into a space before I even knew how to grow mushrooms. You know, talk about like being naive and just ignorant and dumb. And we were very, very fortunate that we were able to get out of that. And then I had a taste of, whoa, there's all this stuff I don't know. Let's pump the brakes for a second and let's make sure we know what we're doing before we move on. So let's figure out how to make our product. Let's start there. You know, it's worth the investment to build out the operation on a small scale. And I didn't know any of the business terms. I didn't know the word prototype or minimal viable product, or I didn't know any of that stuff. It was just, I feel like I need to know how to grow mushrooms before we go start a mushroom farm. So let's start there. And then, so in my experience, it all just sort of came at me like a fire hose. Yeah. And I keep teetering on it. So I'm going to jump into this little 8-day stretch where I basically learned all of that. So I had ended up, being on my own for this by October. So October, I'm growing mushrooms in the basement. Nathan's out of the picture. And I end up meeting a friend who was just really passionate about mushrooms. She had a chanterelle tattooed on her arm, and we went out mushroom hunting, and we went and picked chanterelles. And
I think I saw you on the trail up at Emerald Lake one day.
Really?
When you guys were up there, yeah.
Back in 2018?
Yeah.
Oh!
Yeah. You guys
Holy
were
cow,
just
yes!
looking around.
Picking
I'm like,
mushrooms?
what are you guys
That's
doing?
crazy.
Yeah.
You are right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Talk about foreshadowing. Yeah, so we went on this kind of mushroom hunting date, if you will. This girl that someone put me in contact with. Another very, very serendipitous way that we came in contact, which is a whole story we don't have time for. And so I tell her about what I'm doing, and she's like, I want in. I want to get involved in that. She ends up getting her master's degree in sustainable food systems here, and her project was focused around the cultivation of gourmet mushrooms. And so perfect, potential partnership for the business. We don't end up becoming business partners, but we end up working together and writing a lot of grants together and doing pitch competitions, and now we live right next door to each other, and we're really good friends. So at that time, she had come here from Colorado, and she knew of these business school programs where they do these pitch competition ideas. You stand up and you pitch your business plan and potentially win money. And it was like, yeah, let's give it a go. Let's see what that's all about. So one morning we walked into the business school, and then they redirected us over to the Blackstone Launchpad, which is in the Student Union building in the cafeteria. Amazing resource, game changer. No one knows about it. I vaguely remembered these two guys at orientation years prior where they blast you with all the resources that MSU has in a 2-hour, everyone talks for 10 minutes, and you just get this fire hose of information about what kind of resources are there, but I didn't remember it. And I was like, oh yeah, I think there was this group that helps college students and faculty and alumni flesh out business ideas. And so it's called the Blackstone Launchpad. I think they exist at 17 universities around the world, and Montana State's one of them. So we walk in there one morning, and this guy, Trevor Huffmaster, big, tall, lanky guy, just turns around and he's like, whoa, you guys just walked in here, no appointment or anything? Love it. What do you got? Lay it on me. And he was just so excited. And it was like, yeah, so, I started growing mushrooms, and we kind of tried to scale into this facility, and that fell through, but we got our money back, and now business partners have shifted, and now I'm looking at this thing out at Three Hearts Farm, and we're going to build a facility, and I'm talking, and meanwhile, all of a sudden, the area where we're sitting just starts filling up with people. All kinds of people are just eavesdropping, and they're like, you can tell they're like, whoa, what do we got over here? We got something. And one of the guys working there rolls over this chart, and it's the 5 stages to starting a business. And he's like, you don't know this, but you're already on stage 3 of 5 of starting, how you start a business. It's ideation, prototyping, commercialization. And he's like, that's right where you're at, is you had the idea, you built the prototype, the minimal viable product, and now you're looking for a space to turn it into a business. And I was like, cool, yeah, I didn't even know. I was great. That's awesome. And they're like, look, it's super last second, but we have this pitch competition coming up called the Big Idea Challenge, where you can win some money by pitching your business plan to, these guys that are venture capitalists, one of which is Jake Jabs of the Jake Jabs Business School, like notorious, very successful, wealthy businessman, literally on South Park as the rich guy with the white tigers. He's one of the judges, as are some other venture capitalists. And they're like, so applications are due tomorrow. But we really think you should put something together because you're a lot further along than most of the other applicants. So me and Allie walk out of there and we look at each other and we're like, game on. And so for the next 24 hours or so, it was just like, we got to put together all these essay questions. We got to make a slide deck. We got to make a 3-minute pitch video, get it submitted by 5 o'clock the next day or whatever. We're meeting in between classes and working on stuff and kind of getting a flavor of what it's like to work together. And we submitted. We got accepted. 42 teams got accepted to this. 42 teams applied. 12 got accepted. Spoiler alert, we win. We take first place. But so we go back in a couple days later for our what is supposed to be a coaching meeting for that pitch competition. Rather than focus on our pitch slide deck, all of that, one of the guys comes over and he's like, hey, have you heard of this grant from the Department of Agriculture called the Growth Through Agriculture Grant? And he's like, there's a pool of $500,000. And they award it to 20 different businesses. Max is like $50,000, minimum is like $5,000. And you can get money for basically new innovative approaches to agriculture. They want to help diversify and strengthen Montana agriculture so it's not just wheat and barley and things that are renewables and giving back into the environment and sustainable and different. They like that. Everything we were doing. Yeah. And I was like really locked in on that idea. And meanwhile, Allie's like, well, let's not get distracted from the thing where we got a pitch competition in, 8 days or whatever it was. Or no, 6 days. And so we leave that meeting to go set up in some hall at some table, and we're supposed to be working on our slides. And I'm like, I just want to take a look at that grant real quick. Let's just take a quick gander at that. And it's like, ooh, it's due in 8 days. And we're just like, dang it. Okay, well, that's out of the question. We've both been in grad school for a few years. We've written grants for government agencies. We know how this process works. This is not something you do in 8 days. This is something you do in months and months and months. And we don't even have an idea. I'm growing mushrooms in my basement. That's all I have at this point. And so we agree to park it. We're like, next year. We'll come back to that next year. Or so at that point it was 9 days. It was due in 9 days. So we park it and we let it go. That night I could not sleep. My heart was pounding, my gut was telling me something. And I get up at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and I open up my laptop. Remember, I normally slept until 10, 11 o'clock. For some reason, I was like, I can't sleep. Let me just look back at that grant again. And I'm sitting there scrolling through it, and it's, there's a lot here. There's all these essay questions, and you need to attach a business plan and all these financial projections and all these attachments. There's so much that goes into this, matching requirements and, all the logistics of a federal grant. And I remember scrolling through it and sitting there thinking, it's a lot, but it's not impossible. And I texted Allie, and I've gone back and screenshotted this text. I was like, hey, I know you're really dead set on just doing the pitch competition, but I think we should do both. What do we have to lose other than sleep? And that was my attitude about it was, we don't need to sleep. We can do everything. That's okay. We've got a pitch competition 5 days out. The grant is due 8 days out. Let's do them both. Meanwhile, we don't have anything. We don't have a slide deck. We don't have any of this prepared. And so she was a little more timid about it. And so it was more like, let's divide and conquer. I'll focus on the pitch. I'll focus on the slides. and we'll keep meeting in between classes. We're both going to grad school still. We're both going to classes in the day and then meeting up when we have gaps of time and practicing for the pitch, getting information for the grant. You know, there was this stretch where I went kind of nuts, truly. I think I had somewhat of a psychotic break where if someone tried to talk to me, it was like, you couldn't. I was so locked into what was happening. It was like in my head I had calculated how many hours there were between now and 8 days later. And I knew I needed all of them. I needed all of the hours to do this. And so I was contacting all these different agencies in the community. I reached out to a couple different professors. I don't think it was the business school. I think it was in like the finance department. George Haynes was one of them.
Yeah. Ag Econ.
He was one that got back to me. Huge shout out to him. Big lifesaver. I reached out to him. I was like, hey, I'm doing this crazy thing. Quick little preamble. I'm doing this. I've got a couple days. I don't know what balance sheets are or profit loss statements or income sheets. I don't know what any of that is, and I need to have 3 years of those for a hypothetical business that I'm creating by Friday or whatever. And he was like, come on in, I'll give you 30 minutes, something like that. And so that was one of those days, and I set it up to where that was basically going to be the day before the grant was due. So it was like meet George at 9 a.m., meet Prospera Business Network downtown at 12:30, or that was the day of the pitch. So it was, the pitch is at 5:30 at night or something. So it was like meet George at 9, learn what these things are, come back, work on them for 3 hours aggressively, calling suppliers, figuring out how much revenue can we make, figuring out everything on those papers. He circled and he's like, this is what cost of goods sold means. This is kind of how you find that information. And he was very calm and stoic and relaxed, and was like, okay, kid, come on. Like, I'll here's what these are. And he printed out some templates for me, and he highlighted some things, and he's like, here's kind of how you figure this stuff out. Gave me 30 minutes, and then I was off. I had 3 hours to, now build those things before meeting Prospera Business Network at 12:30 to review my financials. And when I go in there, the pitch competition's later that day. The grant's due in 3 days. And I come in hot. I haven't slept in 5 days. I think I have slept, I do 1 hour every 2 days or something. I'm not exaggerating. I know people do this all the time. Like, oh, yeah, I haven't slept in days. I mean, I really didn't sleep for 5 days. I did a 1 hour nap in the middle of 5 days. It was something otherworldly was happening that I couldn't miss this opportunity. And so I storm into Prospera. Thank you so much for meeting with me. Papers flying all over, and I look cracked out, and I'm a mess. And he's like, yeah, let's take a seat. I looked into that grant that you're applying for, and I have some bad news. It looks like you had to submit some paperwork a couple weeks ago to basically submit your letter of intent. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, whoa, what? And all of a sudden, my whole world just and I was like, wait, what? And so we pull up a laptop, and he shows me what he's talking about, and I'm so disoriented. I'm like, oh my God, I screwed up. I missed something. And my world just crumbled. And I was like, I was so on fire for 5 days. I designed the whole facility. I ironed out a 14-page lease agreement with Three Hearts Farm, worked with a lawyer, got it notarized, got it signed, designed the facility in exactly how it looks today, got all the equipment costs, found my suppliers, found local restaurants interested in buying the mushrooms. I mean, I built the whole business, just by figuring out, what's the next thing we don't have. That grant from the Department of Agriculture, all the essay questions, all the different components of that grant, it'd say, how much are you going to spend on Montana-grown commodities per year? Okay, now I have to figure that out. How much grain are we going to use? How much compost are we going to produce? And so all of a sudden you're doing all the math and figuring everything out. And my world just fell apart. And he's like, well, we got the room for an hour. If we want to, we can talk to you about the various resources that we can offer you. And I'm like, sure, let's do it. And he starts talking about Prospera, and I'm just like, let me stop you. He's like, yeah, I can see it. I'm like, I don't have it in me. I'm sorry. I need to go. And I leave, and I remember just so vividly wanting to take like a bottle of whiskey and just drown myself. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, I've never felt so perfect in my life. I've never felt so sharp and so focused and so passionate. And I missed something, and I couldn't believe it, and I let Allie know. And she's like, are you going to be good for the pitch competition here in about 3 hours? And I'm like, yeah, I will. Like, let me go home and just kind of pout for a few hours, and I'll meet you there, and I'll snap out of it, and, you know, let's still have a good time tonight, and let's still pull this off. And so we do come up with this last-second idea to take some of the mushroom blocks that I'm growing in the basement and sneak into the business school and hide them in the podium that we're going to present at, so that when it comes time for us to talk, I can pull these things out and have these gorgeous looking mushroom clusters growing. And we end up totally stealing the show. It was this packed event, 100 people there, all these business professors, everyone's in suits. All 11 other teams are business school students, and then me and Allie, these sciencey microbiology and sustainable food systems people. And we take first place. Kind of, momentum's back on in my head. I'm like, okay, so we didn't get the grant. Look at everything we just learned in 5 days. Look at everything that just came together. Let's look at the positives. We didn't win a ton of money. We won $1,500, but man, talk about validation from some big name business people that, hey, out of everything you saw today, you're the one that Jake Jabs and, Next Frontier and Frontier Capital and like these very experienced business people, they saw something in us, and they were like, that's the one. Like that meant a lot. I also knew now there's going to be a press release. So soon, very soon, everyone in the micro department's going to know that I'm doing this. So the clock's ticking. So that was like Wednesday night. The grant is due Friday at 9 a.m. So I go home, and I actually sleep about 6 hours that night. Should have slept like 16 hours, or, I should have been out. I remember I cooked like a 14-ounce steak, and I wouldn't let myself touch any intoxicants or anything. That was a big deal for me at that moment in time, that this whole mushroom farming thing was something I wanted to do with clarity. I wanted to make sure it was me doing this, and I didn't want to be on any substances at all, for a variety of reasons. And so I had a big steak, and I slept, but again, I woke up at like 4 or 5 a.m. For no good reason. I was like, I gotta take a look at that grant again. Let me just go like, and I find the thing that he showed me, and it kind of feels arbitrary. It feels like this optional thing that I'm like, I'm just gonna call the what is it, the PO, the program officer, or whatever. I'm gonna call the person at the top and just hear it from them that we missed this opportunity. And I call, leave a voicemail, don't hear anything back. Later I have grad school still. I'm in a statistics class at like noon, and I get a call from her, and I bolt out of the class, and I go answer it in a stairwell. And she's like, oh yeah, that thing, that was totally optional. That was if you wanted us to review your documents ahead of time, we could give you some feedback with 2 weeks to go. But no, the grant's not due for another 2 days. You still have, about 40 hours or so to get it done. And it was like the energy bar in the video game. It was just like, like, back on. Like, okay, shift gears. Sit through the statistics class. Okay, let's get through this class. And then it was like, Allie, meet me at my house. We're back on. She's now bought in after winning that pitch competition. And it was like the next 2 days, it was nonstop, just sitting at our kitchen table in that gross basement apartment, just grinding on this grant, answering questions, calling suppliers, calling people, getting information, researching, rewriting, running paragraphs back and forth to each other, tweaking words. It was incredible. It was like something out of a movie. And we got to a point where I remember Thursday night, about 4 a.m. or so, grants due the next morning. There's still a fair bit to get done. Grants due in 8 hours, and Allie's like, I'm starting to get weird. I'm starting to hallucinate. My mind is going to not pleasant places. Yeah. I think I need to go. And it was like, okay, go. I got this. I'm going to finish it up, and I'll text you when I submit it. And And I didn't go to sleep. I just kept going and going and going. And I submitted it at 8 o'clock in the morning. It was due at 9. And I sat back and I was just like, what just happened? Like, what did I just do? 8 days ago, none of this existed, and then I'm like, oh crap, I have lab meeting in like an hour. I have the Kaminsky lab meeting. I look like hell. I haven't slept or, I didn't shower since the pitch competition. Wasn't nourishing myself well. I was so like passionate, so alive, so infected with this idea. And so I drag myself up to campus, sit through this lab meeting, and it's like culture shock. I'm like, I knew in that moment, I was like, I'm not doing this. Like, this isn't for me. We're talking about these IL-10 receptors and these mouse models and stuff, and I'm just like, no one here knows what I just did in the last 8 days. No one here knows that I'm, building out a business and just submitted for grant funding. We only requested $11,290. At that point, I believed was like a third of what we needed to get started. But the more you ask, the more competitive you have to be. There's a fixed pool, and that's what we had learned from speaking to other people who have gotten it. The less you ask for, the more likely you'll get it. If you ask for $50,000, you might get it, but you better be perfect. And it was like, we have nothing. We have no business experience. We barely have a lease agreement. We barely have a facility design. I did manage to get an architectural friend to throw together a 3D rendering so I could slap it in there and make it look real good. But it was like, let's not get greedy. Let's ask for an amount that we think they'll give us. And they ended up giving it to us. I ended up having to go up to Helena 4 months later to defend that grant. So when we talked in your office, I hadn't secured that grant yet. Right. It was that day. I submitted the grant on Friday. I talked to Doug after lab meeting, and then we regrouped on Monday. Okay. Doug was like, I pulled him aside after lab meeting, and I'm like, hey, can I talk to you? And he kind of looked me up and down, and he was like, yeah, let's go in my office. And I looked like hell. I mean, I looked bad. I know I did. I was shaking, and I looked like I looked like I was tweaking on something, and I wasn't. I was just really spent, and I kind of looked down at the ground, and for about 45 minutes, I told him the same story I just told you. I just did all this stuff, and this is coming out of nowhere. He has no concept that this is coming, and I look back up at him, and he's just sitting in his chair with this look of a concerned parent on his face. Just all he says is, "Are you okay?" And that stood out to me forever. I mean, that was such of all the things he could have said in that moment, I can think of a lot of different professors that wouldn't have handled it with that grace. Mm-hmm. But he was just, "Are you okay? Are you safe? Do you have what you need? Are you okay to get home and rest?" And I'm like, man, I'm better than I've ever been. I feel amazing. I'm tired. I'm hungry. And he's like, "Okay, go home, sleep all weekend, eat a ton of food, and I'll prep Seth for this, and we'll meet on Monday." And that's when we met that Monday morning, and I was trembling outside their offices like, what are you doing? So I guess to answer your question of like, how do you learn how to business, you just start and fail so many times. And if you can fail on the small, you're going to save yourself time and money. Unless there's a manual out there for like, how do you run this company? Like, here's the checklist of all the things you need to do. I don't think there's any substitute for just diving in head first and learning it as you go. And you're going to constantly come across things you don't know, and it's going to be so scary. And you're going to go, oh no, we didn't prepare for that. We didn't plan for that. We didn't budget time, money, resources, expertise for that. Okay, let's figure it out. And not let that stop you, not let that deter you. Someone asked me in an interview, like, what's the one piece of advice you would give to an upcoming entrepreneur in the business school? And it was something along the lines of, like, move in silence in a way. Don't broadcast to everybody what you're doing. So the way I kept everything secret, I didn't tell you guys, I didn't tell anyone in the grad school, I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell my My older brother kind of knew. I felt like he was kind of a safe person to tell this to, just because I needed to get something off my chest. But there was like 9 months there of me kind of living this secret life and building out this business. And then basically just my roommate, through proximity, knew that I was doing this, and that was it. Nick Pinkham probably knew. He lived there, kind of. Yeah. He kind of was around. And I wondered if he would leak it at some point, but I don't think he did. No. So what I would say is, like, do it and keep failing and keep learning and get to the point where you're never going to know everything. You're never going to know all the things. Someone's always going to be able to say, well, what are you going to do about insurance? Or, what if someone gets hurt? Or what if you get someone sick? Or how are you going to handle this? And you are not always going to have those answers. But if you can get to the point where you can answer 70, 80% of that, then you can kind of stand your ground and feel confident in those conversations when you talk to somebody that you value, whether that be a parent or a friend or whatever. And now you can say, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And they're going to go like, whoa, how much money can that make? Or, what about this? So how are you going to handle this? If you can't answer the majority of those questions, you're going to be riddled with fear. And it's going to stop you one way or another. I don't think they mean harm when they do that. I think that's just a natural human reaction to be like, whoa, okay. You just presented this new thing that you're going to do. Well, what about this? What about this? How are you going to handle this? And you get all full of doubt. So if you can answer 70, 80% of those questions with confidence and say, I've already thought of that and we've got this in place. I'm going to be going through this channel and securing that. Well, I don't know that one yet, but I'm so far along in this and I know this so well that I have confidence in myself that I will be able to figure that out at some point. So I'm not going to let not knowing that 20% stop me from chasing this. We're just going to have to figure it out along the way.
It's an amazing story, Ben. I think so many people will enjoy listening to this.
Cool.
So I don't think we have time to get into the operations of the business, nor really should we. It's a successful business at this point. You have employees. You serve mushrooms to some of the best restaurants in the Montana.
60-second overview of that, I guess. Like, we've got 5 full-time employees. We've been profitable the entire time.
That's amazing.
From the time I got, so these guys let me get out with the Constellation Prize master's degree. Got out in May of 2020, and for the next 3 months or so, I just hustled and I worked odd jobs all over town. I raked leaves, mowed grass, painted houses, did roofing, siding, picked up dog poop, chopped down trees, hauled stumps, hauled things to the dump. Whatever, hung ceiling tiles at the new construction at the hospital. I just did all of this, and I created $36,000. Plus, I got the 11 and some change from the grant, plus another $1,500 from the grant. Then there was another COVID relief fellowship thing that I got into for $5,000, and I managed to put together $75,000 by the time it was all said and done, and I just sunk it all into the business. And so because no one would give me a loan. Prospera, the banks, Small Business Administration, none of them would give me a loan. And if they were going to give me a loan, they told me I needed more than I thought I needed. And I was like, no, I'm asking you for this much money. And they'd say, no, you need this way more. This bigger number. And I was like, I'm just going to go figure it out. I'm just going to go make that money. Like, screw you. Watch me. I had an attitude about it for sure. And so the way I look at it, being that I kind of created that money out of nowhere and then sunk it in, then I was like, okay, now we're flush, and it's been profitable ever since.
Wow.
Someone with a business background might say, well, that's not how you do that math. I don't really care. Like, as far as I can tell, I was able to start paying myself immediately, small amount, but I could live. Yeah. And within 3 months, I had my first full-time employee. Now we have 5 full-time employee and 1 part-time EA, executive assistant, to help me with administrative stuff. We sell to 30, 40 different restaurants around the Gallatin Valley. This week we sold 845 pounds of mushrooms. Last week was 865. And we're in our, the high of our season. We're going to come down and then we'll come back up for the summer, where I expect us to be doing about 1,000 per week all summer. And we're kind of saving up, hopefully banking up some money over the next 20 months that we still have at that farm, saving up as much money as we can to make a move towards the next space. Still looking to buy land, to build out a much bigger, more permanent facility. And that is a challenge and a half.
Man, I bet the lenders they'll give you money this time.
They might look different. Yeah, it might look different this time.
Yep.
That really is. I mean, this is inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
It really it challenges me to think about my own career and my own ambitions.
Well, it goes back to what that guy said to me in that basement at the Christmas party in 2019. You don't need to be a teacher to teach.
Yeah.
This was what I visualized. This was what I wanted to do. Whether it's a podcast or me standing at a farmer's market, or I've taught to the culinary program on campus, the plant science program, the business school, the microbiology school. I've taught, and I do that every semester. I love this stuff. This is not work for me. It's like this. When he said that to me, this was what I envisioned, was I can be an inspiration. I can do something really cool, and I hopefully can inspire people to whatever my motives are, my agendas, whether it be that, listen to yourself when you're drinking every day and looking forward to the weekend. Like, that's one of my agendas, is pay attention to that, and I get to spread that word. I get to tie in my background in that master's degree that I wrote on lion's mane mushrooms, which we won't dive into, but it's a cool platform for me because everybody comes up to me and they're like, oh, lion's mane, that's the one that's going to make me smarter, right? And I go, do you have a few minutes? Like, let's dive into where you get your information. Let's dive into what the process of humans acquiring knowledge looks like. And so like my grad school experience was so valuable. Like, I use it so often, but maybe not in the way
that you thought you would.
That anyone thought I would.
Yeah.
I'm not carrying on any of the projects or the research I was doing, but I get to use the foundation that I learned in grad school as a conversation piece and an educational tool. I love it.